Morning, kids! Who is Liz Truss? Given her popularity among Tory members, she's probably our next Prime Minister. But even if you follow politics quite well, you probably only know her as the MP who once went off on one about
pork markets.
And that's probably going to help her, because suffice to say, not everything has gone to plan over the last 12 years under the Tories. In fact, she even felt comfortable pointing out how much her party has failed this country in this week's debates.
I'm afraid some of our hospitals are falling apart. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn near me, bits of the hospital being held up by stilts. I do think it is morally wrong at this moment when families are struggling to pay for their food that we have put up taxes on ordinary people when we said we wouldn't in our manifesto and when we didn't need to do so.
And she feels comfortable doing that because she knows that she's not the face that comes to mind when you think of the current economic crisis, the 200,000 COVID deaths, the corruption in her government, the criminality of Boris Johnson, or even the chaos of Brexit. So let's look at who Liz Truss really is, first by looking at her voting record. Now, you just heard her say that it's morally wrong to put up taxes on people who are already struggling to pay their bills. Now, you hear that and you think, there's somebody who understands it's the government's job to look after the poorest in society. And when it comes to paying for that, it's the people who are really rich and the corporations who should pay that bill. But she's always voted to cut the financial help that the government gives to the poorest in society and against raising sickness and disability pay. Meanwhile, she's also voted for corporations, people who earn over £150,000, people who have mansions, to pay less tax. That means that throughout her political career, she has always chosen to give poor people less money and let rich people keep more money. She also spoke this week about giving more power to local governments.
Because I simply don't think that people can sit there in Whitehall and direct everything that happens in local communities across our country. And this is all about giving more power locally.
But Liz Truss has generally voted against giving local governments more powers and has always voted to cut their funding so they can do less with the powers they have. For example, even when she did vote to make local governments responsible for supporting those in financial need, she cut the funding for them to actually do that. So much for levelling up. Then there's Boris Johnson's legacy of lies, corruption and criminality. Was she part of it or just an innocent bystander? Despite the clear and mounting evidence that Boris Johnson had broken the law during lockdown and was lying about it, she said,
if he's lied to Parliament, should he resign? We know what the ministerial code is. Should he resign if he's lied to Parliament?
I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions. The future of the Prime Minister is assured. He's doing an excellent job on the things that matter, recovering the economy from COVID, getting Brexit done.
So because Boris Johnson delivered a Brexit that hasn't exactly been great for the country, he gets to break the law and be Prime Minister? And she didn't just defend him, she lied for him. Like when she said that he'd declared all the money he was donated to fix up his flat.
These items are declared in line with the ministerial code.
And then when pressed on it, she changed it to,
all the costs will be declared in line with the rules.
Now you all remember the billions of taxpayer money that was wasted during the pandemic. Transparency International, the global anti-corruption charity, found that there was a VIP lane for businesses run by Friends of Conservative Party figures, allowing them to get multi-million-pound contracts without any competition process to make sure they could actually do the job. For example, £156 million of taxpayer money was spent buying medical masks and equipment from a company that had just been set up by Liz Truss's advisor, and that PPE didn't even work. And when Tory MP Owen Paterson was found guilty of getting paid £112,000 by private corporations to basically push for the policies that those corporations wanted, bribery, Liz Truss voted to change the rules to protect him. So the stink of corruption didn't rub off on Liz Truss simply because she was there. She supported that corruption every step of the way. She also voted for the Policing Act, which the Parliament's Human Rights Committee says violates our right to protest by putting completely subjective noise limits on them, and which the Home Office itself says will discriminate against black people by giving police forces who already stop and search black people 7 times more than white people additional powers to stop people, even if they have no reason to suspect that individual. So when you add the racism to the suppression of free speech, let's just say the UK has been heading in a historically dangerous direction, and she's one of the MPs who've been dragging it there. And yet, as I said, when we think of Liz Truss, most of us think of her saying things like,
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
But that's where it starts to get really familiar, because despite pushing through all these dangerous and poverty-fueling policies I just mentioned, she's developed this image of being this bumbling fool that doesn't really know what's going on. Remind you of anyone, we cannot afford to be fooled twice. And just like Boris Johnson said,
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
Then switched to supporting Brexit because he knew it would make him Prime Minister, Liz Truss has done the same thing. And oh boy, this next bit has been an absolute pleasure to research because I looked at everything she said between January 2016 and June 2016, and I think she might have been the best Remain campaigner on the board. Now, she'll tell you she's changed her mind, that she now thinks that Brexit's good for the UK. But you've got to think of her as a person. How? What new evidence could she possibly have seen in the last few years to make her think she was wrong for campaigning for Remain? Because I can tell you, she was spot on. For example, 2 days before the referendum, she said the UK economy was growing faster than other G7 countries because of our membership of the EU single market. And now, her government's economic brain, the Office of Budget Responsibility, says Brexit has shrunk our economy by 4%, an equivalent of £100 billion. And you just heard Liz Truss herself say,
We've currently got the lowest projections of growth rates in the G7.
It's almost like the UK might have done something in the last 6 years to make us fall to the back of the pack. But we're expected to believe that she saw this and genuinely believed that Brexit was making things better. She also said that EU membership keeps prices low, and now the UK has the highest inflation in the G7, which means higher prices. And the London School of Economics has calculated that Brexit is directly responsible for a 6% increase in people's food bills. But what? Liz Truss saw that extra 6% and thought, tastes like sovereignty. She told farmers they'd be better off in the EU, and now farmers have had to burn over 40,000 pigs due to a lack of EU butchers. She even visited the Food and Drink Federation and told them that their industries would be better off in the EU. And at the end of last year, the Food and Drink Federation posted losses of £2 billion and has directly blamed it on Brexit. Then there's this now deleted article she wrote for The Sun about how Brexit would make it more expensive to do business by drowning companies in paperwork and forcing them to comply with different rules on either side of the border. And would you look at that? Half of UK exporters have either had to reduce or stop selling to the EU altogether because of that extra red tape. But my favourite, again, now deleted article of hers, is the one where she says that Brexit would lead to a wasted decade. Specifically, she warns about 10 stagnant years mired in complex negotiations. Well, we're over 6 years and counting now. And she's specifically saying that as Prime Minister, she would renegotiate the Brexit deal. And she still understands that people don't want this kind of chaos because she stood on a manifesto 3 years ago saying she'd get Brexit done. She even called for more of the left to oppose Brexit back in 2016 because she didn't like the idea of internal squabbles in the Tory party leading to chaos in our relationship with Europe. And then there's the main thing she brags about these days.
I delivered dozens of trade deals.
Back in 2016, she said it would be unlikely for us to get better deals than the EU has with non-EU countries. Well, her own government's figures show that the benefits of the deals that she's done is 178 times less than the damage that's been done to us by harming our trade with the EU. And as for the Japan deal that she loves to talk about, her government figures show that that will improve our economy by £1.5 billion. But her own figures also show that the deal the EU did with Japan would have improved our economy by £2.6 billion. The fact is, these Tories know they're hurting the people of the UK. I pointed this out on the radio to John Redwood, a Tory MP who'd been campaigning for Brexit for 30 years, and the guy just ran away.
Their own experts say that every possible Brexit scenario leaves this country financially, economically worse off, which means that right now what they're trying to do is something that they know will harm the country. That makes it official Tory policy to harm the country. So of course they can't find a position because there's nothing that's going to actually be acceptable to the British people.
OK, John Redwood, if you'd like to respond to that, good afternoon to you.
No, I don't think I'll respond to that. I wasn't told we were having a debate. You asked me to do an interview on what the options are for our future trading arrangement, and I'm very happy to talk about that.
People across this country are suffering. They simply cannot pay their bills. And of course, Brexit is not the only reason why things are bad, but anybody who's really struggling knows that every penny counts. So they need to be able to trust that their politicians are putting their needs first. And yet here we have Liz Truss, somebody with a history of cutting financial support to the poorest, defunding local councils, helping MPs get away with bribery, giving tax cuts to the rich, defending a law-breaking prime minister, and pushing a Brexit that she knows will make the people she claims to care about even more desperate. And she can't hide behind the democracy argument because Norway isn't in the EU, but they are in the single market and they're doing better than we are. So continuing with a Brexit that they know is damaging, that is a political choice that the Tories are making, not the people. And yet whenever the topic of Liz Truss backing Remain comes up, it's always in a jokey, oh, isn't it funny, you used to back Remain, now you're leading Brexit, haha, sort of way. I just wish that some journalist would say to her, so Liz, The suffering that you predicted Brexit would inflict on the people of the UK is almost all coming true. So why do you insist on deliberately hurting people when they're at their most vulnerable? Have a great week.